Ladies and gentlemen, if we can please begin to find seats and end our conversations, we're going to begin services in just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services, if we can please kindly turn off all cell phones or electronic devices, or please place them on silent. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we gather to honor the life of Joe Lichtman, Coach Joe, Dr. Joe, Yosef ben Moshe ben Naomi, a man who I learned demonstrated so much caring and love in his life. Was told by members of his family that caring and love was, quote, him in a nutshell, that it truly defined him. But you, in judging from your nods when I said that, likely knew that already. Perhaps you have memories of him being your doctor, arriving for house calls with his black bag, hearkening back to a bygone era. Or you saw him at his office in Philadelphia, and he would treat your medical symptoms, of course, but he was a doctor who prioritized the totality of you, asking how you're doing personally and how members of your family were doing. Or perhaps he was your coach, where he would, no surprise, do very much the same thing, going the extra mile to care for his athletes, for his children's friends, becoming a father figure for so many who needed one. Perhaps you're one of Joe's friends yourself who got to have fun with him running around the JCC, or his sharing a love of Philadelphia sports, the ocean, his boat, or nature. I do not think I knew Joe in life as many of you did, though perhaps our paths crossed over at the JCC. I spent time with his wife Sandy and with his children, with Abby and with Greg, who shared with me about the man who was such a cornerstone of their lives and in the lives of so many. They told me about his love of the Philadelphia Eagles, which, by the way, is why we're starting so late. I was told under no certain circumstances would he have ever allowed his funeral to take place during an Eagles game. So thank goodness it was a blowout and we're not in overtime. I learned about his unwavering support for his children and their passions, inspiring Greg in his journey into medicine and being Coach Joe to so many of his friends, and supporting Abby's creative talents and endeavors. Abby reflected to me that her father was also the very best storyteller, too, in addition to always being creative and fun. Sandy reflected to me about their short courtship, how she knew quickly that he was the one, leading to 45 plus years together, full of love. I learned that up until a few months ago, he was biking 50 to 60 miles per week, very active. Abby called him a, quote, schmoozer, reflecting on his ability to talk to anyone, even the guys he would hang out with during his, quote unquote, workouts multiple days a week at the Catch JCC. This was certainly a man who lived life to the fullest, and we celebrate him today and mindfully raise up his kavod, his honor. You're going to hear from a number of family members and friends shortly who knew him well in life and could characterize that love better than I ever could. So more formally, we join together to raise up the very best attributes of Joe Lichtman, Yosef ben Moshe ben Naomi, Zichrono Livracha, of blessed memory. He survived, of course, by his loving wife Sandy, and his daughter Abby, and his son Greg and Greg's wife Karina, and his grandchildren Wes and Bella, and his sister Savannah, and Savannah's husband Jeffrey. May your love and support for one another, God willing, carry you through this difficult loss and transition. Our Jewish tradition teaches that while the physical body is temporary, the soul is eternal. So today we gather together for sacred purpose, to pray for full and complete rest for Joe's body. And we note that his soul remains forever bound in the bond of life, and that's to each of you. And we seek blessings for the continued elevation of his soul. It's my prayer that our time together today have purpose and deep meaning, and that it honor well Joe's memory, who passed away just a few short days ago as the Jewish community was entering into the pilgrimage festival, the holiday of Sukkot. May we spread out a sukkah, a shelter of peace, a sukkat shalom, over all who mourn today. And to those who are not part of the immediate family, the extended family and friends, I remind you that a sukkah is fragile and it's impermanent. And it's only made stronger by the guests that invite themselves or are invited into it. So your job is to help this family fortify their fragile sukkah of peace as they navigate this loss and transition. Stay present, stay with them, and help them be strong. So once again, welcome. Welcome to those gathered here in person in the chapel and to those gathered on the live stream. Your presence, even from far away, is felt here in this chapel, and you join in this community of mourners here today. I'm going to now recite Psalm 23. Actually, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Rabbi Nathan Weiner. It's an honor and representation of myself, my family, and the Jewish community to be present here with you today. And now I'm going to recite Psalm 23, a psalm used universally across the Abrahamic faith traditions at moments of loss and grief. I'm going to read it first in the Hebrew, followed by a standard translation in the English. If you're comfortable and would like to join with me in either language, as much or as little as you're comfortable, you are welcome to do so. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo achsar, bin oteshe yarbitzeni al me menuchoti nahaleni, nafshi yeshovev yancheni b'maglet tzedek l'ma'an shemo, gam ki elech b'getz al mavet lo irara ki atai madi, shivtecha u'mishantecha hema yenachamuni, ta'aroch lefanai shulcha neged zorarai, dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi revaya, ach tov v'chesed yerdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai le'orech yamim. A psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen v'amen. On Sukkot, it's customary to read from the book of Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, and from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what has been planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time for silence and a time for speaking. As I mentioned before, a number of family members and friends have prepared words to share, to speak at this moment on Joe's behalf, to lift up his honor and dignity. We're first going to hear from his sister Savannah to offer some words.
Joe was my big brother. He referred to himself as BBRO, and I called him BBRO. Like many big brothers, he taught me how to catch a ball, and I can still hear him saying, "Get under it and keep your eyes open." He taught me how to do a layup. But the story I want to tell you is a story that will resonate with you because I think it's the essence of my brother Joe. When I was 12 or 13, I asked Joe to drive me to a party, and he did. And I was kind of excited because they were going to be playing Spin the Bottle, and it was my first time for Spin the Bottle. Well, Spin the Bottle led to post office, And post office started to make me a little nervous. And then people started pairing up, and I was terrified. So I made my way stealthily to one of those big black telephones with the rotary dial. I called 428-2678. My brother answered the phone, and I just said, "Come get me." He said, "I will be there in 10 minutes. He didn't ask any questions. He just came and got me. When I got in the car, he said, "What happened?" And I started to tell him, and I was embarrassed, and I felt silly. And he stopped me, and he said, "Anytime you need me, you call me, and I will come get you." And my whole life has been like that. No matter what I've needed him for, I could call my brother, and either physically or psychically or by telephone, he came and got me. I know there are a lot of you sitting here who had the same experience with my brother. My brother ran to the fire. He didn't back away. He ran to the emotional fire, which for so many of us is the hardest place to go. At one point, when Sandy and I were talking to Joe about the administrative issues, Sandy said to him, "How do you want to be remembered?" And he said, he loved his family. And Sandy said, "What else, Joe? You loved your patients. There were so many things that you did in your life." And in a weak voice, he said again, he loved his family. And you, his patients, his friends, are part of that family he loved. One of the things that made me sad and then actually optimistic again is something that happened in a conversation with Greg. Greg was lamenting that his children will not know my brother Joe. But in the same breath, Greg said to me, "I didn't know your father, but Nima," that's what he and Abby called my grandmother, "and you and Joe told me so many stories about your father that I know his integrity, I know his strength, I know his values." We will be talking about Joe today and for days to come, but what I hope is that we tell these stories to Wes and Bella and the rest of the family, and that they know who Joe was, because Joe was all love. And that's my big brother.
Now hear from his cousin Ian.
I'm just going to speak from the heart and talk about how much I'm going to be thinking about Joe forever, in the same way that I've been thinking about Joe for all my life, because I grew up in a family where my dad made it clear, and he never lectured me on this, but this is the way he just lived, where we spent every Sunday getting in the new car to go visit a different aunt or uncle with their family, and that's how I got to know my Aunt Norma and my Uncle Maury and my cousins Joe and, well, in those days, Linda, until she became Savannah. And I just realized how much I loved them from the day I was a kid until this very moment, and still think of all of them. And as I got to know Joe, you just discovered, and Savannah's already talked about this, what an amazing person he was. a primary care doctor who cared more about his patients than he did about becoming rich and wealthy, because when somebody would walk in and couldn't afford to really be treated, he treated them anyway. He showed that he really did have a belief of being there to help those others. So, and then I got lucky, quite frankly, in the last couple of weeks, because I got to spend a good deal of time with Joe as he was on his way to his next experience. We got to talk a lot to each other. We got to go outside and walk around. And I am just so happy and thrilled that I got to be with him for as much as I was. But he really was a classic person, and he has a wonderful family that are still here, and I love them all just as much. So, Joe, I will never forget you, and I hope that your spirit and soul will have as good a time in the future as you did while you were on this earth with us.
Ian spoke of Joe's deep care for his patients, and I'm now going to invite his dear friend Jim up to speak, who I believe began as a patient and then became a dear friend. Jim? Did I get that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Rabbi stole all my lines. Thanks a lot for that. Well, I first met Joe as a patient in his office at 2nd and Bainbridge Street in Philadelphia 43 years ago. He was so attentive and caring that I knew he would be my go-to guy forever. He quickly became the sweetheart of friends. This was a man who cared for everyone he came into contact with. He shared with me that he loved to care for people who often did not have anyone else to care for them. How good is that? Not what I did, what he did. As the years went on, we would always speak with each other about everything in our lives. He spoke so sweetly of Sandy, Abby, Greg, Karina, Wes, Bella, Savannah, and even as well about his parents quite a bit. Joe lived a big life, and it was so much fun to live it with him. We went to many events together, be it sports or just hanging out. Joe was just a great guy to be with, and the way he formed relationships with my entire family, we're also thankful. All of us that knew Joe know that he was really Superman with a Midas touch. He really understood the game of life and how to live it. I'm so honored to call him one of the best people I've ever known. Joe is very thankful for his lot in life, which is something that we could all aspire to. He handled his own illness with the best way that he could, and he accepted his position in the end very well. What a wonderful man, a great teacher for all of us. For that, I'm thankful and always will be so proud of him. He will always and forever be in our hearts. Let's not forget all the house calls, thanks, Rabbi, he made, the visits he made to the hospitals, and for always calling all of us to make sure we were all well. Thank you, Joe. We'll always remember and love who you were and how much you meant to us. Thank you.
Now his children, Abby and Greg.
Go Birds. Glad we got a win today, because today would have sucked really bad if we didn't. Thank you all for coming. But more importantly, thank you for being a part of my dad's life and being a part of what he described as the party, which for him just meant life. Today I'm sad, and I feel a huge, huge hole in my life, which will soon get filled incrementally with love. But today I also stand here incredibly grateful for having my dad for the past 40 years. Dad was the most caring person I have ever met, and that's going to be a theme I think we're going to hear from a lot of people. Every day of his life, he made time to look after somebody else, to do a good deed, or simply just to try to make you smile. He taught me to see the good in everybody, no matter what their appearance was like on the surface. With my dad, he took on your problems as his problems, and his world was not okay until that problem was solved. Early on in my life, Dad would appear aloof at certain times. You'd be sitting there and you knew he was kind of off in the stars doing something. What I learned later was that he was just trying to solve someone else's problem. And he would rejoin us as soon as that problem was solved. This didn't apply just to us as his immediate family. This was his friends, his patients, his extended family. But how lucky am I to have had that every day as his son? Dad described his world as a love fest. That stemmed from his days as a hippie, and well, his days as a hippie never stopped. Our house growing up was full of hugs, I love yous, I'm proud of yous, and as a new parent, this will be my guide. His life was full of love, and he made sure it stayed that way, whether calling to check in on you as a friend, random dropping by your house, or just a random text message out of the blue, often with nothing but emojis. He expressed to me at the end that looking back on his life, one of his biggest joys was how full of love it was. Many of you know my dad as Doc, and so we'll talk about him as Doc for a minute. And many of you know that my dad inspired me to become a doctor myself. And yes, I was fascinated with what he knew about the body, and I thought it was really cool the role he played in our community as Doc. You need a flu shot, come over to the house. Something's wrong, we're going to find out at the kitchen table what's wrong.
Yeah.
But what really struck me about him was how invested he was in his patients. It was the nights, the weekends, times we were on vacation where he'd pick up the phone, and even random trips on Thanksgiving Day to Vito's parking lot to make a house call with Karina. Because he just wanted her eyes. If his patient had a problem, he was there for them. And this was not something that annoyed him the after hours, the nights, and the weekends. This is something he truly cherished. Whether you were rich or poor, he cared for you in the exact same way. And if you didn't have enough money to pay him, that was okay. He was going to take care of you anyway. Dad taught us to unapologetically live for yourself and to be yourself and without compromise. And he said, if you're not able to do that, life's not worth living. His shaggy appearance, his unkept clothing, the funny odor that often came from his beard. In addition to all of those, he had many other wonderful attributes, but this is who he was, and he wasn't about to change that for any of us. Right? He's a huge sports fan, as you guys know, hence the late memorial service today. Whether he was playing, coaching, or just being a fan. Coach Joe was made for some wildly fun practices and incredibly funny drills, learning how to play sports, brought about some crazy nicknames for myself and my buddies. And he was the eternal coach, bragging to me that he would frequently see a kid in the JCC shooting baskets with bad form, and hey, I went up and gave him a pointer. And I thought I was proud of that, but his jump shot stunk, so it really, I was like, careful what you're imparting on these young kids. But that was his spirit. He just wanted to help, and that's where that came from. And, you know, through all the games in my life, my dad was always on the sidelines, whether it was as a 5-year-old playing soccer or all the way at Muhlenberg on a midweek night where it was cold and rainy and I had no chance of getting off the bench. He was there at that game anyway. And through all that, the only time he got upset with me was when he thought I didn't try hard enough. My dad had a passion for nature, the land and the sea. He loved being on his boat and being on the back bay. And this was originally disguised as a passion for fishing. But after years of him not catching any fish and still going on his boat, I realized it was just his passion for nature and being on the water. And don't tell the Coast Guard this, but he did change his mind at the last minute to have his ashes spread in his boat slip rather than being buried. And that just shows his love for the water. But don't. And he also had a passion for the land. He was raised on a farm, and when we bought our property out in California, there's nothing that brought him more joy than coming out, getting his hands dirty, pulling weeds, planting plants, planting trees, and having burn piles and bonfires. And one of the hardest things for me would be out there working without him. I'm going to put some of his ashes in our orchard, so he's always there with us. They won't be right near the trees, though, so we can all still eat the fruit. Last, I'm going to go a little off the cuff. My dad always spoke about the world of men and what it's like to be in that world of men. And for a while, I didn't understand it because I thought he was talking about cool clothes, looking good, picking up girls, and didn't love that. But what I realized he meant as I got older is it's not about that. It's about being a good man and doing the right thing at any point in your life. And he led by example with that, and I hope I'll keep that up moving forward. In closing, we've all come to know my dad through many different paths, and we've all come to love him for different reasons. One thing I think we have in common is the impact that he's had on us all. He made us laugh, he hugged us, he supported us in our lows, and celebrated with us vigorously in our highs. He's left this world a better place.
You did. Stole a few of my lines also, but it's all right.
Themes.
Yeah, there's going to be some recurring themes. So I'll start by saying my father, for those of you who have met him, which is probably most of you, was sort of like a disheveled version of Albert Einstein. His hero. His clothes were often on backwards and inside out, and in his own words, he looked like a country clubber who escaped from an insane asylum. He was not quite as smart as Einstein, but pretty close. We used to race him against the calculator when we were kids with long multiplication tables, and he would win every time. His last late life, he loved to learn, and his last late life learning adventure was an Einstein-inspired dip into astro and quantum physics. He loved fun. He loved getting dirty, Philly sports, Bob Dylan, taking care of his patients, and going out on his boat. He loved a good beer and a good joint, beating us all at Scrabble, biking over the Longport Bridge, even at 80. He loved my mother's cooking. He loved working on my brother's ranch. Chocolate milk. getting his mustache deep clean by any one of our family dogs. He also was the crier in the family and taught us that real men do cry. He taught us the value of good music, though we never had any in the house because he couldn't figure out how to use the sound system in any decade. As a few of you know, my father and I are almost the same person. So we understood each other in a way and on a level that nobody else ever could. We can never find our keys. We cannot pay a bill unless it's on auto pay. Our brains don't record if we've set something down. We have our whiskeys before dinner. We love to learn via YouTube documentaries specifically. We have a hilarious obsession with puns. Like to talk to strangers, stay up late, and always repeat the same stories. Both of us literally would have lost our heads if they had not been attached. He taught us so much. Much of it was passed down from Aunt Sil, Pop-Up, and Nima. He raised two children in the Cherry Hill strip mall-laden suburbs and still managed to produce two adults who are obsessed with the land, growing their own food, skiing POW, being in the mountains and being on the water, making and seeing art, traveling and learning about the world, and knowledge. Oh, nope, that's from the wrong line. Anyway, he loved passion. He valued love, tenacity, passion, and knowledge. He taught us to be a force of good, focus on the positive in people. He said that over and over and over again. Put family first, and most importantly, how to be a good hippie. He taught us the value of meditation, and he used to say, be the Buddha. He loved his work, and it was his life's purpose. He loved to tell stories about his patients, the same ones over and over again. I remember going with him as a little kid to make a house call for this little old lady, and she was not well enough to buy herself groceries or didn't have any money or something. And so my dad was like, we're going shopping. We loaded up the car with groceries, and we brought them into her house, and that was my dad. Many of his patients were too poor to pay, and he said, you need to come in anyway. I don't care about the money. It's important that you get better. We have heard over and over and over again this week how many lives he saved, how many people he took care of during their worst health battle, or even during their worst emotional battles. My brother and I were raised on his epic bedtime stories with Pine Forest Camp and Mr. Bumpers, and we got to watch him do the same with his grandson Wes, with Dr. and Flicky Nikki and their space travels. If Dad was involved, things tended to be heartfelt, chaotic, fun, and wild. My mom used to joke that he was her third child. My mother was a little bit on the strict side with nutrition, so he used to sneak us out late night when she had her networking meetings to Dunkin' Donuts and bring us home and tell us not to tell her, even though we had powdered sugar all over our faces. He sparked my interest in art and design at a very young age with a very special third birthday dress, and supported me in a lifelong quest to have a career in that field, which has brought me so much joy, creative fulfillment, and stability. Everyone in this room knows that my father would have jumped in front of a truck for me. It was an honor to be with him so much during his illness and to hold his hand as he took his last breath. The last thing he did the morning before he died, just before consciousness and lucidity evaded him, was winked at me and mouthed, "I love you," and gave me a little sparkle, his little sparkle wave. While I'm grateful I got to show him my love during his illness, I'm also so grateful we got to do so at his 80th birthday in February. Not knowing he had cancer, I didn't think I was going to be the one to break down and cry. Not knowing he had cancer, but still knowing we didn't know how much time we had left, Greg and I wanted to make it epic, and it was. We cooked him an 8-course meal of his favorite foods, one for every decade, and I gathered pictures from his entire life and strung them together, which you can see at our house after the service. It feels so comforting as we celebrate him now to have gotten to do this with him only a few months ago, and not dampened by knowing what was ahead. Dad, it does not feel real that you are gone. I hope you are up in heaven eating stuck-together pasta with Nima and Pop-Pop, Tommy, Billy, all the Lichtman dogs, smoking a doobie and taking boat rides on the bay.
And lastly, Sandy.
Well, the hard part about being last is my stories have been told already. The kids beat me to it. Joe was born as Joe Michael. He was Joe Michael. He was Joey and Joey. And he was Joe, and he was Dr. Joe, and then he was Doc. And they're all different parts of his life, and all of you in this room know him as different phases of that. Everybody who knew him knew that he was Mr. Gregarious. He was just out there and friendly and wanting to have a good time and starting conversations with new people and meeting new people. He'd go riding on the boardwalk and say, "Oh, I came home with a new friend. Let's go and have dinner and meet them." And the funny thing is that one of them started talking to this guy, and turned out that his wife was a dear friend of Savannah's from growing up, and we spent a lot of time together with them since then. You all heard that Joe was coach and for Greg's basketball teams, and he was a great coach. He made sure everybody got their time, but he went beyond that, and he was such a life coach to these boys. We had several of them coming over and crying in his arms when we knew that his life was about over, because he altered their lives. He encouraged them to go and accomplish their goals and to be who they are. And they're fine young men with families of their own now, and it's an extension of who he is and of our family. You heard about the Nicky family. I was going to tell you about his great storytelling, and I said it already. But so Joe was the last of that breed of GPs, and those of you in this room who are of my age group, more or less, remember Dr. Welby, Dr. Marcus Welby on TV. He took his little black bag and he made house calls, and that's what medicine used to be. When you went to see Joe in his office, there was no 10-minute time limit. There was no computer. He would sit and talk, and sometimes he'd say, "So how are you really doing? What's going on?" I remember stories early on when he first started and was getting his practice started, wasn't that busy. He'd go make his house calls at lunchtime because these Italian and Polish women were feeding him at lunch. And that was just part of his connecting. He'd sit down and spend time with them. And I remember one time he picked up the phone and he called a patient in the hospital because he wanted to make her laugh, because he knew that that would make her feel better. I mean, what doctor's going to do that now? You just don't see that anymore. And I'm so proud that he taught Greg how to be a doctor who takes care of people and not just body parts. And Greg, I know that you've absorbed that, and that's who you are as a doc, and I'm really proud of that. What else is left up here? Oh, so here's a good one. Most of you here don't know the story of how Joe and I met. It's a good one. So I had traveled in Europe with a friend who was from Philadelphia, and she invited me to her wedding, and I said, "No, I'm not going to come to your wedding. I want to come after your wedding so I can spend time with you and get to know your new husband." So I came up to Philadelphia for a weekend right before I was closing on a house in Atlanta. And they set us up for the weekend, and we went out Friday night, and by Saturday night, he knew he was going to marry me. So Joe canceled a ski trip to Aspen to come to Atlanta, and his friend said, "Oh, God, he's really cooked. This is it." And commuting back and forth for about 6 weeks got pretty old and expensive. So after 6 weeks, we got engaged. And my parents, instead of saying, "What are you, crazy? You don't even know this guy," they were so excited I was marrying a Jewish doctor. You know, and that's what counted. But here's the amazing thing. The day after I called my parents and I said, "I'm marrying this guy," my mother called me and she said, "By the way, did you know your great-grandmother's name was Fanny Lichtman?" And I didn't know that, but I got this sense that my ancestors had given me their approval, and that was 45 years ago. We just celebrated 45 in May, so it was beautiful. And Abby's done a lot of genealogy work because of that story, so that's another story. We're third or fourth cousins. That's what the spit test said. So Abby told you how much she is like her dad, and it was really, really uncanny. When they would make puns at the table, Greg and I would just roll our eyes like, "Are you kidding me?" But the two of them have learned such valuable life lessons. You've got a good picture of who Joe was, and they learned important life lessons, how to be good people on this earth, how to treat people with dignity and kindness, and it gives me such joy to watch them out there in the world knowing that they're living these life lessons they got from Dad. So after retirement, Joe had a great time, and he hung out at the gym, and he, loved being on the boat, and we spent time with the grandkids and Abby in California. And he lived a really full life. And when he turned 80, Abby told you about the amazing party they made for him. But he said to us, I'm 80, I didn't get gypped. And he really believed that. He never was angry that his life was coming to an end. And he was lucid enough to know that. It was only 2 weeks from the reading of the MRI to his passing. And in the beginning of that time, he was lucid, he knew what was going on, and he wasn't angry. He was content that he'd led a good life. And that was a gift that he left all of us with, that peace, that he left us in peace. Part of the gifts that Abby and Greg made, Abby put together this incredible quilt with pictures of his youth, his whole life. And we still have it, but it was interesting because when he was under that quilt in the hospitals, he was more of a person and not just another patient, and it made him more of a human being, and he treasured that, and that's certainly now a family heirloom. The cancer was removed. We were told it was all gone, and then it came roaring back. And in that short time, he got to say an awful lot of goodbyes. He handled it with grace, and he left us with dignity. He's going to be missed by a lot of us, this whole room full of people and people who didn't get here. He left his mark, and we will never forget him. Thank you.
So we thought that we have a little special surprise for you guys. We thought it would be fitting and beautiful to let my father close out his own service with his life words.
This is an excerpt from a toast he gave at his 80th birthday party
Yeah.
in February.
Okay, wait.
And there's not a day goes by that I'm not grateful. Trust me.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why you're 80.
I am not. I'm grateful every
There's
day.
a
I wake
connection.
up grateful every day when I'm working out or doing anything. I'm grateful. And in the morning, I meditate. And I ask for three things. I ask for Mom to have a good day. I ask for myself to have a good day. Selfishly, I want Mom to have a good day because then I'll have an even better day. But I didn't think of that till the other day. Okay. Okay. And then the third thing is I want to do good, something really good for somebody that day. I saw that. So I want to do something really good for somebody that day. And so back to you. All right.
That's Joe in a nutshell.
That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's with these beautiful, beautiful thoughts and memories and dedications in mind that we move to the central prayer of a Jewish memorial service, El Malei Rachamim, which asks that even as Joe's body ceases to be filled with the spirit of life, that his spirit, that his soul be granted true rest in the wings of God's divine presence. Invite you, if you're physically able, to please rise. I'll read El Malei first in translation in English, and that followed by chanting in the Hebrew. I'm not sure. O God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant true rest upon the wings of the Shekhinah to the soul of Joe Lichtman, who has gone to his eternal home. For charity has been donated in remembrance of his soul. May his place of rest be in the Garden of Eden. Therefore, may the All-Merciful One shelter him with the cover of God's wings forever and bind his soul in the bond of life. Adonai is his heritage. May he rest in his resting place in peace, and let us say, Amen. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamitzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'ma'alot Kedoshim Utehorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Yosef ben Moshe v'Naomi, Shehalach la'olamo, ba'avor shenadvu tzedakah va'ad hazkarat nishmato, b'gan eden dehe menuchato, lachen bal harachamim yastirehu beseter kenafav la'olamim, v'yitzror b'yitzror hachayim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, v'yanuach al mishkavo b'shalom, v'nomar Amen. Please remain standing. There are two mitzvot that we perform today. The first we just concluded, the mitzvah of kavod hamet, of honoring the deceased. We symbolically conclude our obligations to Joe, and we shift with obligations now towards the family and performance of a mitzvah called nichum avelim, comforting the mourners, which begins now and continues through their period of mourning and beyond. This is the point where you now start filling their sukkah, fortifying their sukkot shalom, their sukkah of peace. The first act that the family takes as mourners is the recitation of the prayer, the mourner's Kaddish, which will be familiar to many of you. And I always like to teach in this moment that the Kaddish doesn't speak of death at all. It only speaks words of praise, and then it ends with a prayer for shalom, for peace. And the thinking behind this is we spent a fair amount of time today hearing about the goodness that Joe brought into the world, the mitzvot that drove his life. We concluded with him saying he just wanted to do good for someone that day. When you do a mitzvah, you get the credit. When he did a mitzvah in life, he got the credit. If he hadn't died, we wouldn't be saying Kaddish. Praising God, that's a mitzvah. He gets the credit, not you. So the goodness that you know about Joe, that he brought into the world during his life, doesn't end with death. You are connected to him in the bond of life, allowing his goodness, his mitzvot, to continue to fill the world in a real way. And God willing, us as the community enabling the performance of this mitzvah, saying Kaddish and the family saying these words, brings you some comfort to know that that goodness filling our world doesn't end with death. So with that intention, that kavanah, I believe it's on page 20, if you're comfortable and would like to say with me the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divra kirute v'amlich malchute, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'izman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mivarach le'olam u'lomei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush bechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who ordains peace in the heavens inspire us to be God's partners and agents for peace on earth, for us, for all the people of Israel, and all inhabitants of the earth, and we say, amen. Please be seated. Our formal time together here at the chapel is drawing to a close. Some announcements on behalf of the family. First, contributions in lieu of flowers in memory of Joe can be made to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital at stjude.org. And the family wanted me to express that it was important to support St. Jude so that families don't have to go through a financial burden of caring for their loved one, something you heard many times as deeply important to Joe's essence and who he was. Family and friends are invited immediately following our time together here at the family residence at 1819 Fireside Lane in Cherry Hill, 1819 Fireside, that's one word for your navs, Fireside Lane in Cherry Hill. And Shiva will also be occurring Monday and Tuesday evenings beginning at 7 o'clock p.m., each night with a Shiva minyan to follow. I conclude my piece by offering you, the mourners, the traditional words of consolation. If you're familiar with them, I invite you to say it with me. Hamakom yinachem etchem betoch sha'ar avelei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May the Holy One of Blessing have comfort for you, together among all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And may Joe Lichtman, Yosef ben Moshe and Naomi, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be an everlasting blessing.